Today I'm going to talk a bit about the most overlooked roadblock to your migration. Those of you that have been considering going to transform or migrate from an on-premise solution into the cloud most likely have shopped around, looked around, see what tools are out there, what products are out there, and there are quite some offerings, quite some vendors have solutions there, Microsoft has guidance there, but what every single guidance or single tool focuses on right now is basically content migration, data migration. And there are good answers there, there are good solutions out there, but what is very often overlooked is customizations. And when you, especially when you talk to Microsoft, for instance, when you ask them, they're like, yeah, but that's so complex, we have to take it in a separate talk with you, or you might consider going for a consulting company, etc. And it is complex, it is very complex, I totally agree. So I will talk in this deck through the different things that you have to think about and what you have to look out for and what you should consider. So a bit about me. I am Erwin van Hunen. I am the product owner, and I see there's actually a little typo on the deck there. It says transformation, but I'm product owner for transformation. I'm an MVP in Office servers and services, which in my opinion is a very annoying label they put on it. It used to be called MVP for Office 365, much easier to pronounce, especially for me from Sweden. And I'm also a Microsoft Certified Master in SharePoint 2010 and 2013. That's enough about me. My contact info are there, and we will record this deck too, this presentation too. So a bit about the basics. If we look at what do we have right now and what are we going to, and I want to put some baseline here. So if we look at the full trust code, if we look at SharePoint 2007, 2010, 2013, and maybe even 2003, and actually still 2016, if you're already using that, full trust code uses the server-side object model, meaning that the code runs on the server. And that's exactly the thing that we want to stop doing. But code runs on the SharePoint server with all its side effects. Then we have declarative code, the typical XML files, the content types that you define in XML, the feature XML, etc. Those are declarative code, and they're based on if you want to call it a language, but a format called CAML, Collaborative Application Markup Language. And then we might have infrastructure-specific components like HTTP handlers. Some of you might have those. Recommended? No, that was not necessarily, but you can, if you insist, deploy HTTP handlers. The problem with full trust code, and this is why Microsoft really would like you to get away from the full trust code solution, is there is a too high level of trust. The code runs on the SharePoint server and can do, in principle, everything. Can bring the server down and within a blink of an eye. It's very simple. Then the add-in or app model, and I've been mentioning that in other presentations before. I tend to still call it the app model, but officially it's called the add-in model, but that's just a marketing term. The switch from app to add-in, there's no technology difference, is using client-side code. That could be CSOM, JSON, REST APIs to communicate with SharePoint. The main difference is that the code does not run on the server, it runs against the server. It talks with SharePoint as a separate entity, and it gets results from that one, but it does not run code on that server. This code also runs with Office 365, and it is configurable, but the trust levels that you have to configure are complex. It is a complex story with the app or add-in model. When it comes to trust. On the server, if you run server-side code, it's very simple. You run on the server, and depending on who you are, you can elevate the rights. And I sincerely hope that you're not doing that, but it's still very common to elevate rights. And you know what you have with the add-in model, it's a bit of a different story because there's two players when it comes to add-in models. That is the add-in itself, which requires a certain level of trust, and then it's the user using the add-in. Both levels you have to consider when building your solutions. Then we have full trust code versus the SharePoint framework, and the SharePoint framework is coming out really, really soon. You might have seen the tweets from Jeff Teeper on Twitter already about the about to be released SharePoint framework. It's right now in its latest release, and it's about to become gold. So on the left side, we still have the full trust code. There's nothing different there. But compared to the SharePoint framework, then you're using the client-side object model in the shape of JSON, or you use REST to communicate with the server, but it's all based on JavaScript and TypeScript. Are you restricted to those languages? Not necessarily, but the whole ecosystem they're rolling out is based on TypeScript currently. You can write everything if you want yourself in JavaScript, but it's all based on TypeScript. It's currently not available for SharePoint 2016, but it has been promised it will come for SharePoint 2016. It will not come for SharePoint 2010 and 2013. But for SharePoint 2016, it will roll it out most likely later this year. The security model is relatively simple. There's only one level of trust, that is all the code runs as the current user that is looking at the web part or whatever component you've been writing with the SharePoint framework. And that brings limitations with it. And the main limitation is elevation. Server-side, it's very easy to give users very limited read write only, but some, for instance, give them only read writes. But in some part of a web part, you elevate the writes, and suddenly you can actually make that user write data to a list, even if the user is not being aware of that. That will not be possible, is not possible in the add-in model, and that is not possible in the JavaScript framework. There are architectural decisions you can make there. You could consider offloading that code to a separate service that runs under another identity. That does the work. There's several tricks there, but out of the box, you will not be able to elevate. Now, when you ask Erwin van Hunen and the product team, will you ever support farm solutions, full trust solutions in Office 365? There's a very clear answer there, and that is no. There will never, ever be support for farm solutions. It is outdated technology. It will just not come. It's still very valid in on-prem. Microsoft is not saying that you should immediately move away because it will be deprecated. No. It is supported, fully supported in SharePoint 2016, and SharePoint 2016 has a lifespan of several years to come. So no worries there, but it will never, ever happen in Office 365. Now, what is transformation? Transformation is a buzzword. Everyone mentions it, and everyone implements the word transformation themselves. So this is how I and how Rencore sees it. Let me first tell you what it not is. It's not taking the full trust code or the sandbox solutions, throw some magic on it, and out comes a app that doesn't exist. There is no way to do that. There's absolutely no way to drop in a WSP file, a full trust solution in a tool, and out comes an app. You will have to do manual work, and most of the time, lots of manual work. Now, what does that mean? Make sure that you look at what you have, and then based on that, implement most likely all your code from scratch. But you can still reuse concepts and patterns and data. But because, if we go back to this slide, because the technology is inherently different from what you've been using on your server-side solution, and even if you use the same language, if you use C# as a language to develop in, the APIs are so different that you just cannot just copy and paste. The only artifacts or types of things that you sort of can copy and paste are declarative artifacts. And then more specifically, fields in your solutions. If you have any fields, they translate very simple to the client-side object model being REST, CSON, JSON. But other than that, you will have to implement from scratch. And that is a lot of work, unfortunately. Now, why would you go through that whole work of transformation? Why would you move to the cloud? Well, maybe you want to move to Office 365. That's the most obvious reason. Or maybe you want to move to a hybrid scenario where some of the parts of your solutions run on-prem and some of them run in the cloud. And maybe they have to communicate with each other. Or there's a version update of SharePoint coming. You could consider, like say your code has been, depending on SharePoint 2010, it's for you ready now to go to SharePoint 2013 or hopefully SharePoint 2016. You will have to rewrite your code. You could consider just updating all the references to the correct assemblies and then recompile your code. And if you're lucky, it will run. If you're not lucky, you will have to rewrite. So now why not take this time to move to the client object model and use CSON or JSON or REST instead? If you do that, you're for sure future-proof. The big benefit of running code against SharePoint, so not on SharePoint, is upgrade paths. Those of you that have been part of upgrades might have seen the issues that are being caused by upgrades, where you have to scan your content databases, make sure that web parts are still there. Maybe you'll find a lot of dead web parts that have been referenced but are not existing anymore, etc. That's all part because the code was running on the server and maybe some very eager administrator has been deleting assemblies from this machine, basically meaning the references of the web parts are still there, but the actual code is not there anymore. After a while you might decide, oh, let's not use this site anymore. Let's create a new site where we fix things. I mean, there's a lot of stuff hanging around on the server that might make it complex for you to migrate to an next version. Another issue that you have is that if you start to modify files in the layouts folder of SharePoint, which are located in the SharePoint root, or in 2010 or in 2007 terminology, the SharePoint Hive, those files are typically not files you should customize. Now, I do realize that many people do, but you should not, because the moment SharePoint is being upgraded, it will just simply assume those files are owned by SharePoint, and it will start to upgrade those, or overwrite those with the new versions, and all your customizations are gone. Maybe you have changed the new requirements in your solution. That could be an ideal moment in time to say, okay, now I'm going to move over to the new technology. Yes, the runtime of your project will probably be a bit longer, because you have to rewrite everything from scratch. But it could be an ideal moment in time to say, okay, now I'm changing my code from server side to client side. And maybe it's too complex, or maybe there's too many issues currently with the server side solution. Maybe you kill your servers too often, etc. So I mean, there are many reasons why you want to move over. But I would strongly urge you to consider moving away from server side to client side. That's what I just mentioned, instant issues caused by customizations. Now, how would you transform your code? You have this enormous code base, you have all these assemblies, all these solutions. And this assumes that you have access to the source code. There are many customers I know that run solutions where they don't have actually access to the source code anymore. They have WSP files deployed to the SharePoint server that has been developed maybe in the past by a consultant, and that consultant deployed that solution. The source code, they didn't have any good strategy in place for version control. The source code ended up on that hard disk of that consultant's laptop, and that went away with the consultant. The solution is there. It's maybe very critical for the functionality of your farm, but you do not have the source code anymore. Now, this deck goes, or this slide assumes that you have access to the source code, and basically you could gradually upgrade your existing full trust components or your full trust solutions one by one to client-side code. That is a way. You can again reuse parts of your code, especially those that comprise of your business logic, reuse the data structures, the concepts and the integrations with external systems. Most likely the external integrations with external systems is based on like .NET code. That doesn't change. If you build your client-based solution, your client object model-based solution in C#, you can just reuse that same code. Major changes. So while server-side object model is supported on-prem, it's a no-go on in Office 365. It used to be sort of okay, when they still supported sandbox solutions. Because you could you build your own web parts in there and run them as a sandbox solution, a coded solution. Now, those of you that have those solutions might have run into issues with it, and for that you contacted Microsoft support, and you said like, hey, I have an issue with this web part that I import in this sandbox solution, and their reply will be simply, sorry, we do not support code. And that's where it stops. I've been myself going through several of those loops years ago when I had issues, and I knew for a fact that it was not my web part, it was actually the server-side object model of SharePoint that had the issue at the time, and it took me like almost several months to convince them it's not my code, it is your server that is causing the issues. So basically Microsoft does not support server-side code. So you have to go for CSON, REST, the graph, or JSON. Try to steer clear from the feature framework, and I'll get into that in the next slide. But try to steer clear from the feature framework. It works, it's functional on-prem, but try to not use it anymore. Especially if you're like totally new to SharePoint development, you might realize that well, this is weird. How does this work? And can I upgrade existing features? And how does that work? And can I upgrade or remove a field from a content type? Might make sense if you're fresh into SharePoint development, that you can say, okay, I have this content type and this feature has an upgrade action connected to it. And one of the upgrade actions is to remove a field from the content type until you find out that you cannot do that. They only allow you to add fields to the content type. Now, the feature framework, relevant at its time, not relevant anymore. We have better solutions. Avoid declarative artifacts and CAML where possible. Now, I hope I don't have to explain to you why you should try to avoid CAML, because it's just terrible to work with. I just have to mention the word CAML query. Any one of you there will know that CAML queries are incredibly complex to read and even harder to debug. So try to avoid CAML and declarative artifacts where possible, especially web templates. Web templates, the follow-up of site definitions, were introduced as the answer to provisioning solutions at the time. And if you dig around on the internet, you'll find blog posts from people describing in detail how to build web templates. Even from people from Microsoft have blog posts about that. But they have their issues, and that has to do with the fact that the base template changes. There's no guarantee that your template works as you intended it to be. So there are some issues around web templates too. So do try to steer away from web templates and content types. I see a question in the chat here. What is the alternative to the feature framework? It's code. It's through code provision artifacts to the SharePoint server. So instead of saying, I activate this feature that will do this, then you just have to figure out, okay, what is this feature actually doing? It's activated, it's creating a content type. Okay, then you write the CSON code or the JSON code or REST code that creates that same content type in the site. This is a complex one. Do not use master pages. If you have master pages in your site, they work until Microsoft decides to upgrade your server or until they decide to upgrade Office 365, your site collections. And there is no guarantee that your master pages will work anymore. Now, having said that, is there a clear no to master pages? No, I don't think so. There is absolutely cases where a master page makes sense. Publishing scenarios is one of those. But be aware of the issues that can occur when the underlying platform is being upgraded. Now, in SharePoint 2016, 2013, 2010, you are in control of when that happens. But in Office 365, you're absolutely not in control when that happens. And it can happen after you realized it. Happened to me. I've been building a custom master page in an Office 365 tenant, and we injected some menu items in the suite bar at the top. And I mean, most of you will probably say, like, you might be aware of that, like, oh, never put stuff in the suite bar because that is owned by Microsoft. Yeah, but that was before Microsoft basically said, we own this part of the master page. So we run into the hard way when on Monday morning the customer called us and said, hey, my page doesn't work anymore. I basically see nothing. We have strange errors, and that's because we injected some JavaScript that was expecting some parts of the DOM to be present. They were not present anymore. We got an error, resulting in a broken site. Minimize your branding if possible. And that is the same reasoning. Things will change, and you see that already right now. If you're already using Office 365, Microsoft started to introduce the modern sites or the modern libraries. That's what I think they did first. So the document library changed its behavior in existing sites. It looked different, and if you have a lot of branding around that, you run into issues. Now you might say like, hey, but we need that, and true, but yeah, we're still working with an external factor, being Microsoft updating the server. Are they always correct in doing that? No, unfortunately not, but we have to live with it. We're purchasing that service from them. We signed an agreement. They will upgrade things at will. And very important, approach SharePoint and Office 365 as a service. Think of it as something that you shall not change. You can provision artifacts, lists, content types, etc. You can consume it, but you shall not change it to your liking. So do not approach it as an application server that you can fully tweak and adjust and modify. And consider going for modern web development technologies. For instance, SPFX. Instead of .NET. Now, this is a strong statement. Is .NET not modern? No, I do think it's modern, especially .NET Core. It's very hip. But consider going for SPFX. That's where the focus lies right now. And that means that you will have to re-educate yourself most likely. If you have a long background in .NET, writing .NET code, ASP.NET, maybe MVC, or building SharePoint solutions in Visual Studio with all its quirks and weird things. Moving to SPFX can be a potentially big leap, because suddenly you have to learn about Gulp and all the other tools that are around the environment. And then if you have looked already briefly in SPFX, you might realize that Microsoft focuses very much on Visual Studio Code and not Visual Studio. So it's a lightweight version. Code is nothing more than a very advanced text editor, which has all kinds of integration points, but that's basically what it is. It doesn't do all of the work itself. It offloads all the compilation work to other tools behind the scenes. And that makes code very lightweight, easy updatable, etc. So the decoupling all the inherent knowledge that the development environment has about the environment, that the tool, the languages you're developing, they fully decoupling that compared to Visual Studio, the normal Visual Studio. That's very different. That might introduce also some challenges in your environment. For instance, if you are using TFS, you want TFS integration maybe, and there are some solutions there, but it's all not native, so it's very open source focused. So Git protocol, which works with TFS and Visual Studio Team Services in the cloud, but it's a new world, and you will have to probably most likely re-educate yourself there. So CAML is bad, and this is a very complex slide. I will not go too deep in here, but let me explain the following scenario, and that is like, for instance, feature stapling. When you have a site feature that you use to staple functionality, you assume that you staple the feature to the feature that knows about it, the site it's being activated in. But what if that base site is being updated? What if that site definition is being updated on Microsoft? Then the assumption you make when building that stapled feature doesn't apply anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, stapled features will not by definition activate themselves on existing sites, only on new sites. That's also an issue. So Microsoft themselves uses feature stapling when they do upgrades. Suddenly you have two stapled features. What does that updated stapled feature do compared to yours? If you upgrade your server, that might be an additional stapled feature to that other feature. So it just makes your life very complex. I'm sorry for that. So one of the one of the issues with CAML is that web templates, same issue, site definitions. If we go all the way back to like how things were done in 2007 and 2010, site definitions are very powerful, but incredibly difficult to debug because there is this Owner of XML file. There, you can't put a breakpoint in the XML file. You can't see what's going on there, so you have to put breakpoints all over your feature activation code. And if you have your features based on CAML, you can't put breakpoints in the feature XML either. You will have to write code in those features, feature activated, feature deactivated, and put breakpoints there to figure out what the feature is doing. So that's just, it makes your life very complex. So if you are writing code in a feature to do things, why don't you just take that code out and write a client-side solution out of it completely without having the feature element to be activated and deactivated? The feature framework is not going away. Microsoft is using it themselves, but maybe that is how you should see it. It's something for Microsoft to do things inside because they have full control over the platform. So for them, it's a nice way to activate and deactivate functionality. But for you, building your own solutions, maybe you should take that activation part out of your solution and do it something with some other technology. We'll get to that in a later slide too. So reimagine. Transformation is not copy and paste. Is SharePoint and Office 365 already providing the functionality? Is it already out there? Maybe it's already there, it just looks a bit different. Now, I've worked as a consultant with many customers that are like, yes, I see that the button is there, and but there's one big issue with it. It's blue, and we want it to be red. That's very important for us. And yeah, of course, there are ways around that by injecting some CSS into the page, but do not build a new button from scratch that happens to be red and does the same thing. Step back. Is this a solution that is actually benefiting from SharePoint? Maybe it's not even a SharePoint solution you're building. Maybe you are, if you want to call it like that, misusing SharePoint for the fact that it is there, and the customer came up to you and said like, oh, we have this need for this, and you shall use SharePoint for it. And that's actually already, they already went a step too far there. They should not maybe say what kind of technology they want you to use. Now, of course, I understand that there's an ideal situation where you can say to the customer, it's like, yeah, sure that you want to use SharePoint, but maybe SharePoint is not the right answer. But if possible, consider not using SharePoint. Maybe it's something else you can use that is much better suited to solve your problem. Are you relying on third-party systems? If so, can you move over to other technology? For instance, are you integrating with a third-party system that has no connection, no JavaScript or REST APIs? If so, you might have a problem integrating with your SPFX solution to that third-party system. So you might have to introduce an intermediate service that exposes a REST API that you can consume from your JavaScript code, and then have that intermediate service call the backend system of the third-party system. So that means that you have to redesign your architecture a bit, and that also might introduce another server in your environment. If you run on-prem, you might have to introduce a new machine that you host, where you host that service on. If you're in the cloud, it could be an Azure instance, for instance. Again, does it have to be SharePoint? Well, not always. I've seen solutions built on SharePoint that were like screaming for a better parent platform, to say it like that. It's like, I would almost call it abuse of SharePoint. And when you start to transform, maybe you should revisit the business requirements. Do not simply think like, oh, okay, this works right now, we have to move it over. Well, how relevant is it to actually migrate this whole solution? Are people actually still using it? And if so, how are they using it? There might be a lot of functionality in there that is not relevant anymore, or is not important anymore. So maybe you don't have to migrate the whole thing. The transformation process. You take your full trust solution and you assess what's in there. You figure out what is in my full trust solution. And there you have a challenge maybe, because especially if you don't have the source code anymore. Or maybe you have source code, but you're not 100% sure it's actually the source code you're looking at is the code that is running on the SharePoint server. It might very well be that a consultant came into the organization, took a copy of the source code from the source control system, made some changes, built a WSP file, provisioned to the server, and then there is suddenly a mismatch between what is in the source control system and what is running on the machine. And that is actually more common than we all want to believe. So that part is important to think about. What is in there? What does my solution comprise? What do I find in here? Then learn about, okay, what is important in this solution for me to transform, and how will I transform it? What kind of decisions will I make? Will I go to technology X? Will I go to technology Y to do this? Will I use CSM? Will I use JavaScript? Will I go for SPFX? Or will I go for an old, if you want to call it old school, app or Addin? Then look at all the artifacts that you discover and plan and track them. Make a good overview of what is important to migrate, what is not important to migrate. Make decisions. A solution usually comprises of many artifacts, and of those, not everything is relevant anymore. Maybe you'll be surprised how many of the solutions running on your farms contain lists that are not being used, or list definitions that are not relevant anymore. Because they have been built by a developer, they've been added to the solution package, it gets packaged in, but it's not relevant anymore. And then the final step, when you made all these decisions, you've been planning and tracking and learning and assessing, then it is time to actually do the work and rewrite your solutions to something that uses the CSM or the client model of access towards SharePoint. Let me go to the bottom of this slide. So there's a couple of techniques you can use to go for. And one of them is the app part, or the app, which is effectively just, if you think about it in old school SharePoint terminology, it's a web part. Behind the scenes, it's not a web part. That's one of the big issues with apps, that is it's an iframe. Within that iframe, an HTML page that's being hosted somewhere else. Or a full immersive app is a full screen app. It basically takes over the full experience from the SharePoint environment. Now you navigate to a different URL, and you have a complete new interface that behind the scenes communicates with SharePoint. You could build custom actions based on JavaScript, for instance. Then you use JSON to communicate with SharePoint. One of the big things, and what I didn't mention in the introduction, I am a member of the PnP core team, and I'm one of the developers behind the PnP provisioning engine. So I explicitly want to bring that up, because that engine uses or is an easy way for you to execute remote provisioning tasks. So instead of having a solution that you provision to the server with an X number of features in there, when you activate your features, it copies content types and creates a list with a couple of fields in there. You could consider going for fully remote provisioning. That is relevant in those scenarios where your solution does not necessarily contain any business logic. That is, that your solutions are only there to provision artifacts into SharePoint sites. Consider going for remote provisioning. Then, where you define your artifacts that you want to provision off server, you do that in an XML file or whatever format you're deciding to use, and then you say, run this provisioning task that pushes out those artifacts into the sites that are relevant for you. Another option is to go for client parts and SPFX. There will be more coming in SPFX. SPFX right now, in its gold release, will only focus on client parts, web parts, client web parts, whatever naming they settle on. And the main difference between the SPFX parts and the app parts is that they do not run in an iframe. So you have full control over the pace. That is a big benefit of SPFX. Then also think very carefully about your hosting. Where do you host your solution? Do you host it on Office 365 or do you want to host it on-prem? Both are relevant. Or maybe a third-party provider, Amazon, no problems there. And what kind of solution are you going for? Now, there's basically, in the case of an Addin, there is provider and SharePoint hosted. Now, you can debate a long time about how relevant or how smart it is to go for SharePoint hosted solutions. The benefit of SharePoint hosted solutions is that you obviously do not need an additional server. Everything is hosted in SharePoint. That is a benefit. The big downside of it is the way that SharePoint creates this app web, which is another subweb in your site collection where that data is hosted. That one causes all kinds of problems with upgrades, among others. And so try to not go for SharePoint hosted apps until you're very, very sure that this is the only way forward because your budget doesn't allow an additional server or that kind of thing. But consider, if you go for add-ins or apps, go for provider hosted ones. Now, your authentication story is complex too. What kind of authentication are you using? Are you using an on-prem AD? Are you using Azure AD? And I will get back to that a bit later also. So, new provisioning approaches that are there for you to get your artifacts out there, how to get them out there on your servers, your SharePoint environment. You could build a provider-hosted app that uses CSAM and REST and does everything in C# code or JavaScript code or whatever code you're using to communicate with SharePoint that creates your artifacts, creates your lists, creates your content types, add fields to them, etc. Maybe provision some list items in lists, upload some JavaScript files in the site, create custom actions, etc., etc. Then people have to basically add that app to the site, and then you can have an event kick in that calls the code in the app and then creates all those artifacts. Effectively, you're misusing, if you want to call it like that, a provided hosted app as a feature. You add something that introduces artifacts into the site. Another approach would be a .NET console, just a simple console application that pushes out those artifacts written most of the time in C#, that pushes out those artifacts into a site collection. Another approach would be to use PowerShell that uses CSAM or REST to communicate with SharePoint that pushes out those artifacts. Big benefit of the PowerShell approach is that you do not have to recompile your application if you want to make a very minor change. You just modify the script. It's easier to update your logic there. You could build a site that uses the graph to do things, but the graph has an issue, a limitation. The graph is very much focused on content and not necessarily on artifacts. So, for instance, it's not possible to create a list or add a field or etc. with the graph. So you can only create list items, you can read items, that kind of stuff, but creating those artifacts is not creating the list itself and creating the field itself is not possible using the graph. Then we have the PnP provisioning engine, and if you're interested in how that one works, I urge you to join one of the PnP monthly calls where we talk a lot about provisioning and also about SPFX actually. And another option, the last option, could be like that use the Mechanical Turk, which is effectively buying in cheap labor where someone sits around and just creates those artifacts in an X number of site collections for you. Well, the big issue with that is of course very error prone. How do you guarantee that it's done in the same order and that the titles of the artifacts are correct, and etc., etc. But it is an approach you could consider using. Now, when I talk about code assessment, it's good to understand what kind of customizations you have. And understand also very carefully what they do and how they do it. And most importantly, I think, is to understand why you have them and if they're still relevant. There's, as I said in a few slides back, there's most likely a lot of code in your solutions that is not relevant anymore. It has been built maybe a few years ago when you just rolled out your SharePoint 2010 environment, and all that code seemed relevant at the time. It's not anymore. Organizations change, insights change. You might want to revisit the need for all that code. Also understand the impact they make on the environment. Do they write files on the server? If so, where and how big are they? What does it contain? How is the security behind them, etc., etc., etc. So consider the impact they make on the environment. And also, of course, understand the effort. Sometimes it's very trivial, sometimes it's very simple to rewrite server-side code to client-side code, because the client-side code has similar methods, just maybe called a tiny bit different. But sometimes it's a bit more complex, and that is in those scenarios, for instance, where you elevate privileges, where the code is executed by a user in the shape of a web part or whatever, and then the code elevates its rights to the system account of SharePoint and basically runs under the application pool identity, doing everything the application pool identity can do, including killing your server or deleting all records in the content database or whatever. Especially if your server is not set up correctly, it can do scary things. So consider the involved effort to transform your solutions. There's a lot of things to think about there. Authentication. This is a topic in itself, so I will not go too deep in it, but what kind of authentication are you currently using and what will you use in the future? And how does it affect your users? You will have to transfer, maybe you contain user accounts in your lists. Will they have to be rewritten into another format that happens to be used by the other authentication service or not? Or user claims, or yeah, so all kinds of questions you have to answer there. Will you use hybrid? In what way or shape will you use hybrid? And how is the authentication happening? Where is the authentication happening? Is it happening in the cloud, or is it using on your local ADFS environment? Those kind of questions you will have to answer because they are affecting your code. How you and where you run your code and under which identity that code is running. What kind of flow, grant flow are you using for authentication? Explicit, implicit, very important. Does the user have to approve, or is it already a given that the application has access? Those kind of things are very important to think about. And I have to say, I'm sorry, but it doesn't make your life easier as a developer initially. These are very complex questions to answer and require a lot of reading and understanding. So the Addin model has a complex security. The apps or Addin model, and I'm not talking about a technology like CSM or JSON or whatever, but just the Addin model where you create an app that you upload to SharePoint that you add to a site, has a complex security because it has two levels of security. The add-in requests certain rights to you. Then the user will have to approve those rights. Then the user that approved the rights are not necessarily the person executing those rights, the app, or using the app. And those are all kinds of different levels of security that you have to think about when it comes to building add-ins or apps. There's a very limited ability to specify what the add-in wants to do. I'm not sure if you ever built an add-in or an app, but you can say, for instance, that the add-in requires access to a document library. Because maybe it retrieves items from the document library. Now, what you cannot do as a developer is to inform the user why you need that access. You can just say, I need read or write access to a document library. You cannot tell the user some additional information like, yeah, I need access to the document library in your site that happens to contain the project documentation. There's no way to do that. The user will have to guess that, or you'll have to provide the user with some additional instructions that you cannot provide in the add-in itself. So you'll have to mail that to them or mail that or whatever. But there's several ways of providing that, but you cannot embed that in the app. It just says like, I need access to a document library, and then you just hope that the user picks the correct document library. It is powerful as such because you have full access to the C# and .NET ecosystem, which is huge. And besides powerful because it's so big, it's also powerful because many of us have lots of experience with the .NET and C# ecosystem. So there's a lot of history behind it that we are comfortable with. We feel comfortable writing with it in Visual Studio. And it has very rich APIs. The CSAM API is very rich. It used to grow a lot. It's not growing that much anymore. You will see that on a monthly basis, Microsoft releases new versions of CSAM. But it is slowly growing here and there with a couple of methods and here and there, but it's not the main focus. The main focus is REST and Graph API. This is where the things are happening. And the reason for that is because they're focusing on SPFX very much. And SPFX has no CSAM access, has no C#. You run it in JavaScript or TypeScript. So the most common endpoint that you consume from TypeScript and JavaScript is REST. So that's where they are focusing. So the SharePoint framework that they are about to release is not a replacement for Addins, but just another option. So don't think of them as like, okay, now they released the SharePoint framework, I have to drop everything I'm doing and I have to start moving into TypeScript. No, it's the Addin model did not go away. There are still scenarios where the Addin model makes sense. So as I said, it's not a replacement. It will still be there. It has a very simple security system. If you create an Addin or an SPFX package and you provision that to the server, it has to be accepted once, and from that moment on, it's available. And you don't have to approve it per site, etc. Because it's the user that consumes the Addin that those rights are using. Every code runs under the identity of the user. And how does that simple work? Because it's JavaScript, and the JavaScript is embedded in the page. So it's the user executing that code. It's not the server executing the code. It's the user executing the code. So it's the user rights that are important. Can the user delete the document library? Then the Addin or the SPFX web part you build will be able to delete the document library. So it's a relatively flat system, relatively simple to understand. There's nothing specific you have to configure. It is also powerful because you have access to the enormously big JavaScript ecosystem with NPM and all the millions of packages. And if you installed the SPFX framework yourself, and you know that when you start to build a solution, if you use Gulp to build your solution, you will notice that you will get includes from everywhere. Basically, that ecosystem is enormous, and it's if you can envision it to be existing, then it probably already exists and you can consume it. Very rich APIs. The JSON API, you can always still use JSON API if you want to. The REST API and the Graph API. Now, comparing JSON and CSAM, what you might not be aware of is that the JSON and CSAM libraries are generated by Microsoft. They are not coded. There's not a developer writing lines of code there. They do that based on the server-side object model. So they use the server-side object model, and from that they extract the CSAM libraries, they extract the JSON libraries. So if something happens in CSAM, it happens in JSON, with the exception of very unique cases where it works a tiny bit different in CSAM or JSON. But if it happens in JSON, it happens in CSAM. And that means also that the JSON development is slowing down. Not many things are being invested in that anymore. It is also very complete. Now, there are some things that are still lacking in REST where you will have to fall back to JSON. Among others, I'm thinking about, like, for instance, taxonomies. There is no REST API for taxonomy. You will have to fall back to JSON or CSAM there if you want to do stuff with the managed metadata spheres of SharePoint. So it's still a relevant technology, but it's not growing. Having said that, it's very complete, and most likely you can pull off anything you want with those APIs. Deployment techniques. So roll back in time, go back to SharePoint 2007 or 2010 or 2013 or 2016 and use a full trust solution. You have these WSP files. I'm just curious, and you don't have to answer, but just think about it. Has anyone used actually WPP files, web part packages? They were around 2 in the old days. Just wondering, most people actually went for WSP files. The full WSP file has, the full trust application has full control over the server. So you install the solution on the server, the code runs on the server. It is very flexible, and with flexibility comes all the risk, and that is with great power comes great responsibility. Code runs under the identity of the server and can bring down the server. And it happened. I've seen solutions that bring down the server or server that has been wrongly set up. For instance, an interesting scenario where the server has been wrongly set up and it uses an expiring account, and one of the applications was logging in with an account that had, for instance, like 3 times strong password, system logs down. So the result was that the application ran at like, I think it was a timer job in this case, and it ran every minute or something like that. It tried to log in with the wrong password. It was hard-coded in the solution. That's a big no-no, obviously, but it was. And the result was just that every minute the server was locked. Yeah, interesting. And so there was a lot of hassle to get that to be removed, because you had to do it within a minute or stop the server first, and then, hassle. So watch out with full trust solutions. Sandbox solutions, they were, at the time, when they came out in SharePoint 2010, they were maybe a good idea. I can see, especially in large enterprise scenarios where you have throughout the world many IT departments, where you want to have a single SharePoint farm that is being split up among the departments, where you want to be able to still people to deploy solutions without actually having to restart the server, which is one of the side effects of a full trust solution too. If you deployed it, you have to restart the server. Then the sandbox solutions, they were relevant at the time, but they're not anymore. The sandbox service requires a setup and some weird side effects on security. For instance, it had to be able to write to the log, and if not, the sandbox server will never start, etc. But still, it's based on WSP files, but you have no benefit, no control over the server. It's much less flexible. If you ever written a sandbox solution, you might have seen that you run into issues like banging your head on the table all the time because you cannot do certain things. They're not being exposed. That's one of the biggest things that will make you bang your head on the table is elevation, because most likely if you build server-side code, you probably will elevate, and that's not available. And that's a phase you have to go through. You have to redesign your solution. You have to come up with other approaches to pull that off. And most of the time, it is actually totally possible to do it differently. But yeah. And as I said also there, with less power comes great frustration. Now, sandbox solution is not available in Office 365. They shut the functionality down. So take away sandbox solutions from your deployment choices. Just don't consider it anymore. It's outdated, deprecated technology. Apps and add-ins, although they are approximately 4 years old technology already, it's still new to many people. Add-ins, they're like, nah, but full trust works. Why should I go to the add-in model? And it's already pretty old technology actually when you compare it to the SharePoint, how long SharePoint is around. But for many people, still very new. It requires a separate hosting if you go for a provider-hosted add-ins, which I strongly recommend you to do. And it has a complex authentication model. But it's available in SharePoint and Office 365. And then we have SPFX, which is still a preview, but or actually RC0 currently. It requires a separate hosting model. It needs to be hosted somewhere. Now, Microsoft thought about that, and they released this CDN integration. So they have their own CDN where you can upload your JavaScript files. So you don't need the hosting as such anymore. It's provided to you by Microsoft. And it's potentially a very new deployment model and development model. When you talk about SharePoint developers, the more traditional ones that grew up with server-side code in Visual Studio. Very different. Consider moving to remote provisioning. So analyze your solutions, find out what is in there, and consider those pieces of code or declarative artifacts that were provisioned by your WSP files to sorry, I'm having a cold and my nose is starting to act up. Consider provisioning those artifacts to external code and then upload those or create those artifacts at will. So for instance, you create a site collection, you can use the user interface for that for SharePoint, the admin experience, or you use PowerShell on the SharePoint server, but when the site collection has been created, then you run your own code that provisions of the artifacts. Now, many developers that are building SharePoint solutions have most likely been thinking about rolling their own provisioning solution. It's pretty complex, especially when you get into the nitty-gritty details. It requires a lot of maintenance, but it gives a very flexible and very potentially very focused solution for the task. That is absolutely a valid approach. You could consider going for third-party solutions. And when I say third-party, then I would like to bring up the PnP provisioning engine. The PnP provisioning engine is a lightweight tool that, or lightweight download, I would say, that allows you to easily provision solutions based on declarative code. You actually write XML. This is not too different from what you've been using, but the difference is that it runs remote and provisions to the server. And then there is the PnP Partner Pack, which I will not go into much detail, but it is a solution, and don't let the word partner scare you away. It has nothing to do as such with partners, but it's a full-blown solution with a user interface, allowing users to create sites and provision artifacts to those sites without actually writing a single line of code. A couple of resources. The Office Developer Patterns and Practices, or the SharePoint Patterns and Practices, is a open source community. It's led by Microsoft. There are many people use the code that we provide there. Provides all kinds of helper libraries, PowerShell commandlets, JavaScript code for you to use and consume and move away from server side to client side. And we have lots of samples there. Now, we're almost at the end, and I do realize that we're running over the hour, and unfortunately we started a bit off, and again, my strong apologies for that, so I hope you can still bear with a few more minutes. What I would like to show you is the offering that Rencore has to help you to transform, which is the Transformator. So let me launch the Transformator. Transformator. It's launching on my other screen, so I'm moving it over soon to the presentation screen. And in the meantime, I could actually ask a couple of the questions in the Q&A. What is the alternative to master page? How are we supposed to fully customize the look and feel our SharePoint hosted app, for example? Yeah, that's a complex one. There are scenarios where master pages are still relevant. You could consider injecting JavaScript. That JavaScript then accesses the page it runs on and then rewrites parts of the page or introduces new design elements like headers and footers and that kind of stuff. You could consider rewriting or injecting some CSS that overrides the out-of-the-box CSS. Branding in itself is complex. Microsoft realizes that, and they are working on solutions there. It's all very much still in the development phase, but it will come. I'm not saying that it will come to the level that you can modify the full master page. That's not happening, but there will be more branding options being released for SharePoint in the future. And then here's another one. The PnP provisioning engine only provisions one site at a time. Yes, it does. And that is actually the same thing with code. The code, if you write a coded solution, you will always, and that is due to the way the client-side object model works, you connect to the site, you do something in the site, and you disconnect from the site. So indeed, that is a limitation of every remote provisioning solution. So most likely, if you want to take away the WSP file concept and that, for instance, creates a site definition, you will have to roll your own code and then provision that site collection and then provision the artifacts in there. People are asking for the slide deck. Yes, you will get a copy of the slide deck, and we are also recording this session, so no worries there. Yeah, we will share that. This is the Transformator. The Transformator is a tool that can help you to analyze your solutions and make decisions on what to transform. This is a client application, so you do not have to run this on the server. And I can analyze a solution, and I click on this button, you will be able to select the WSP file, which we will not do because it will go through the whole analysis phase, which can take a bit of time depending on the size of the WSP file. What I will go for is, and by the way, you can download this tool today. It's a free download. So you can go and open the solution at will. And there we go. We open the demo project. And what we did during the analysis, we basically took your WSP file because the input is a WSP file. The input is a WSP file. We took your WSP file and we broke it apart and we looked inside on what is in there. And then based on the context of the WSP file, we present you with solutions. So for instance, we tell you what kind of artifacts did we discover. So what is the biggest side? Now, so I analyzed 3 solutions here. You see that the big part is actually fields. In this case, this SharePoint Project 1, very intuitively named solution, contains 415 fields. Now, I'm the first to admit that if we create a solution with 415 fields in it, there's something wrong with that solution. That's not the approach you should follow. Nevertheless, we did it for demo reasons. Then we show you a bit, or like what did we define in your code, and I hope you can read it. But like for instance here, that's like we found a site definition, a couple of solutions, UI and branding elements, etc. And then also split up per solution. The complexity and effort we calculate based on elements like, okay, this content type has a field in it. That field is an out-of-the-box field, or is that field a field that is customized? If it's a custom field, it will be more complex to provision that artifact using the client-side object model, for instance. And those kind of 5 factors we take into account for all the artifacts and calculate the complexity and effort to need. And here we show a bit of, and this is, I'm also the first to admit that this diagram is not the most intuitive one, but this one shows you dependencies between the various solutions. We actually show you that in a different way too, and I can show you that a bit later. Then we went through all the artifacts in here, and what we did is we discovered types of artifacts, and we show you learning material. How do I move over from on-prem to the cloud, and what do I need to learn? For instance, you see an item here, branding transformation, and if I move my mouse over it, and I hope you can read it, but in the bottom it says, your solution contains 1 master page and 0 page layouts. Therefore, you should learn about branding without custom master pages. And this is a link to a video on channel 9 that allows you to learn more about branding without custom master pages. This is a Kanban board, so you can move these items and you can say, okay, hey, this is my to-do list. I find this interesting. I'm going to read this. And when you're done, you move into the done phase. So to keep track of where you are in your progress of learning about the different solutions. We provide you with filters. This is part of the free download. But it's depending on the analysis you're looking at. So this is, if you open the demo solution, this is what you will see, because I just opened the demo solution, and the demo solution is in the free download. Then we have the plan and track part. So here we discovered all the artifacts, and we're categorizing them by its top level. For instance, I have a content type here, so if I expand this one, see there's 2 content types in here, and we have currently a status of unclear. So this means basically here I can decide what I want to do with this content type. Do I want to migrate this one? Yes or no. Do I want to transform it, or do I want to abandon it, or hey, maybe I'm done with it? So let's say make a decision. I am transforming this one, and then we update these little bars here on the top, so to give you, when everything is closed, give you a nicer overview of what's happening here. You can also double click on an artifact, and when you do that, you get more details about that specific artifact. For instance, we show you the general information about migrating that specific artifact from and to the client-side object model. We also show you the different transformation options there are, and if they're full and partial. And that has to do, for instance, with REST API and content types. There are some issues when it comes to field references. So how do you think about that? Or how you might want to think of it as a partial migration, because content types and REST API, you will not be able to create fields unless the field is first available on the list. That's a bit of a long story, but yeah, we show you how complete the target technologies are. We show you roadblocks here. For instance, if you go to roadblocks, for instance, this content type references a field being the ISBN number, which happens to be in the solution, but you need to provision it first, otherwise the content type will not work. So if we move over from this solution, you can actually also go to a Kanban view of the same data. and you can drag and drop multiple items. You can also group items into a use case. For instance, this content type, that list, and this field all belong together to this specific use case being the vacation request. So you can make the decisions per use case and move them from under review to abandon or down, etc. All this data can be exported to Excel too if you want to. And then the last step, and this is where I usually say this is where the magic happens. So the last step, the transform tab. If we open, for instance, that same content type that we listed there, the test content type, what we do is we analyze the XML in there that we discovered in the solution, we show you the XML of the solution, and we transformed it for you to CSAM. So we wrote the CSAM code for you that actually provisions that same content type. But if you prefer JavaScript, we have the JSON code for you too. We generated the JSON code. If you use REST API, we have that code. If you want to use TypeScript, we have that code. PowerShell and REST, PowerShell and CSAM, PNP CSAM, and I always love to show the difference between PNP CSAM, which is very optimized CSAM, and a normal CSAM. There's always a difference there. PNP PowerShell, and last but not least, the PNP provisioning engine, where we generate the PNP provisioning template and we generate the code for you to provision that specific template. And that goes to the level, for instance, if I go to site definitions and open the site definition here, then you see the ONET XML here, and here we generate the PNP provisioning template for you. We went into every feature, discovered what is in that feature, and added those artifacts in that feature in your template. It gives you a very nice starting point. You might want to tweak here and there a bit, but gives you a very nice starting point. And this data can all be copied to the clipboard by just clicking on this link, and you can paste it into Visual Studio at will. We also do web parts. So if I take a visual web part here, we generate the SPFX code for you. Now, don't jump to the conclusion to say that we completely transformed this web part for you in code and you don't have to write a single line of code anymore. No, what we do not do is we do not transform business logic. Unfortunately, we do not transform business logic for you. So we transform the artifact itself and the code for you to provision that artifact, but the business logic in there, we cannot rewrite CSAM to server-side object model to client-side object model. We help you. If I go into assemblies here, it's loading the items it discovered, the coded items that it discovered, and if I go to an event receiver here, for instance, and I go to item adding, it's loading, there we go. We show you the item code that comprises of that specific solution. If I go to item updating, let's see an example here. For instance, here is a call, get after properties. If we expand that one, we show you the CSAM call you have to make for the specific server-side code. So it helps you to move over from A to B effectively. Now, the big benefit I think of Transformator is that it does something that is very hard to pull off at Visual Studio, and that's to get insight in what is in your solutions. This information can be extracted, obviously, from a WSP file. It will take you a long time. And then it's just a matter of dropping this functionality in, and there you go. Now, I want to give you a little sneak, it's not a preview because I'll just mention it, but what we are about to release is the ability for you to scan your farm. So you will run a tool that you install. It's actually not installed. You just copy it to your server with the appropriate access rights. You run the tool. It will generate an analysis. That analysis you take to the Transformator and you drop in a Transformator. What we did then is discovered dependencies between artifacts. We discovered the solutions that you have installed in your farm. We analyzed those solutions for you. They are part of the report here then. And we show you, for instance, this content type in this solution is used in that site, this site, and that site. This allows you to make decisions, for instance, like, okay, this solution has a content type, and I'm actually not using that content type anywhere. Why should I transform this? So those questions you will be able to answer in a future release of Transformator. We're actually working on that one as we speak. That's so that's coming up. The tool is freely available. The tool is free download. However, you will only be able to open the demo project out of the box. The analysis phase, if you run your own analysis, requires that you purchase what we call credits. So how it works is that you run a free assessment. You click on free assessment, you drop in your WSP file, out comes a high-level report. That report contains, we found so many content types, so many provisional, transformable artifacts, etc. High-level data, and the number of credits that you require. Then you go to our sales department and you purchase those credits, and you will get an unlock code that allows you to unlock that report in its full glory, and you will get all the data that I showed you. But you can download the tool for free. You can download it and play around with the demo result and see if it does what you expect it to do or difference to your liking. But this demo project is there for you to use. SPCAF is separate from Transformator. SPCAF is code analysis and code quality. That is what SPCAF focuses on, whereas Transformator focuses on moving you from server side to client side. So it's a different thing. The code quality, we do not check. There is a migration analysis, but it's a bit of a low level. It's like, you could think of it, this is where Transformator started. But yes, there is a migration analysis in SPCAF too. Right now, we are not considering building this functionality into SPCAF because the user model is very different from SPCAF too. SPCAF generates a report. This is an analysis that is dynamic. You can make changes, close the application, open it again, and you can still see the changes you made or the decisions you made. Right. They're both still very useful. Currently, they have no connection to TFS, but both will. Both will. That is also on the roadmap. We will have an integration with the plan and track functionality, where instead of doing the planning here and on these boards, you can actually export this data to TFS and Visual Studio Team Services, where you will be able to do the planning there. Yes. Okay, this is it for me. Oh, I see the last question, and then I'll have to close this because we're running extremely over time. How do we transform sandbox solutions? Identical. If you use a transformator and you just drop in your sandbox solution, you will discover all the artifacts and they will help you. Consider sandbox solutions actually as a different way of running a code solution against a single site. So you will, because sandbox solution is only applicable to the site collection it is located in, so you will have to analyze what is in your sandbox solution, what are you doing, and then considering writing an application, console application, or using the provisioning engine to provision the artifacts that the sandbox solution is provisioning. Web parts in those sandbox solutions will have to be rewritten using either an Addin or SPFX. Event receivers in those solutions, when you have event receivers running, which is not uncommon either, will have to be written to either remote event receivers with all its challenges or to webhooks. So there are different targets there that you will have to consider. Then I want to thank you for all hanging around so long. Again, I'm sorry for starting so late. It's the time zone mix-up that we had completely. And again, my sincerest apologies for this. Thank you, and all have a great day, evening, wherever you are located in the world. Goodbye.